The greatest prison ever built has no walls, no guards, no chains, only thoughts. You live inside your own head, repeating the same words, fears and doubts until they become your reality. Your thoughts have become your captors, dictating what you can and cannot do, defining who you think you are. But you are not your thoughts, you are the space in which they appear and disappear. When you forget this truth, you become enslaved to a voice that was meant to serve you. The cage is not out there, it is within you. The mind was designed to serve life, not dominate it. Yet most people have handed over the reins to this restless instrument, allowing it to dictate every decision, emotion and reaction. The mind's job is to analyze and organize, but when it becomes the master, it blinds you from the deeper intelligence that flows through existence. It begins to twist reality into fear, confusion and limitation. The tool that was meant to help you navigate life turns into the very thing that traps you within endless patterns of thought and doubt. You must understand that thinking is not knowing. Thought can only divide, categorize and label what it perceives, but it can never touch the essence of life. When you depend solely on the mind to understand existence, you are trying to see the ocean through a small hole in the wall. Real knowing comes when the mind falls silent, when you experience life directly without words or judgment. The mind can describe a flower, but it can never feel its fragrance. Only in awareness beyond thought does true perception unfold. Most of what runs in your head is not original thinking, but recycled memories. The same stories, fears and judgments from the past play again and again, shaping how you see the present. You are not living today, you are reliving yesterday. The mind repeats what it knows because it is afraid of what it doesn't. This is why people stay trapped in the same emotions, same conflicts and same routines. They are prisoners of their own mental loops, unable to step into the freshness of now. Overthinking poisons your being. Every unnecessary thought feeds anxiety and self-doubt, filling your inner space with noise until you can no longer hear life itself. The more you think, the more you disconnect from what is real. Awareness is the only key that opens the cage. You cannot stop your thoughts by force, but when you watch them without judgment, they lose their grip. In that observation, a gap appears, a stillness where freedom breathes. Silence is not emptiness, it is fullness without clutter. It is the state in which you remember who you are beyond the chatter. Peace does not need to be created or found, it is what remains when the noise fades. The ego survives only through constant thinking, it feeds on identification with the mind. When the chatter stops, the false sense of I dissolves, revealing a vast, boundless awareness that has always been there. In this space, fear disappears because there is no someone left to be afraid. You realize that you were never broken, never lost, only distracted by the noise of your own thoughts. Liberation is not a distant goal, it is the choice to stop being a prisoner of your mind and step into the freedom that has always been within you. Thinking has become the most overused and misunderstood function of human intelligence. People have begun to equate the constant movement of thought with awareness, believing that if they think enough, they will eventually find truth. Yet thought is only a small fragment of intelligence, a mechanical process that works with what is already known. It recycles memories, compares, categorizes and concludes. It can only function within the boundaries of the past. When you try to grasp life through thought, you are trying to capture the infinite with something limited. Thought is like a net, it can catch what is small and defined, but the vastness of existence always slips through. The mind thrives on labeling. It cannot sit with uncertainty or silence because it finds security in definitions. The moment you see something, Your mind names it, judges it, and places it into a box. This labeling creates the illusion that you understand, when in truth, you have only reduced the living to the mechanical. You may know the name of a flower, but you have not experienced its essence. You may analyze a sunset in words, but you have not absorbed its beauty. Thinking separates you from direct experience, it replaces life with commentary about life. Thought is inherently divisive. It breaks the wholeness of existence into parts, right and wrong, good and bad, me and you, success and failure. Once the mind fragments reality, it begins to live in conflict. Every thought is a boundary and every boundary creates distance. The more you think, the more you separate yourself from life's natural flow. The deeper truth cannot be reached through analysis because analysis is always looking at the reflection, never the source. To see clearly, one must look without the interference of words or judgment. Stillness is not the absence of intelligence, it is the highest form of it. When the mind becomes quiet, a different kind of knowing awakens. One that does not depend on memory or logic. It is an intuitive perception that arises from being fully present. This awareness that does not dissect or measure, it simply sees. In that seeing, truth reveals itself effortlessly. The silence of awareness is not empty, it is rich, vibrant and alive. It is the space where everything is known without needing to be thought about. Real wisdom begins when you stop mistaking thought for knowing. The mind can be a useful instrument, but only when it is in its right place. Beneath awareness, not above it. When you no longer rely on thought to define your reality, you open yourself to the vast intelligence that exists beyond the mind. You begin to experience life directly, without distortion, without boundaries. Knowing then becomes not something you think about, but something you are. Thinking has become the most overused and misunderstood function of human intelligence. People have begun to equate the constant movement of thought with awareness, believing that if they think enough, they will eventually find truth. Yet thought is only a small fragment of intelligence, a mechanical process that works with what is already known. It recycles memories, compares, categorizes and concludes. It can only function within the boundaries of the past. When you try to grasp life through thought, you are trying to capture the infinite with something limited. Thought is like a net, it can catch what is small and defined, but the vastness of existence always slips through. The mind thrives on labeling. It cannot sit with uncertainty or silence because it finds security in definitions. The moment you see something, your mind names it, judges it and places it into a box. This labeling creates the illusion that you understand, when in truth, you have only reduced the living to the mechanical. You may know the name of a flower, but you have not experienced its essence. You may analyze a sunset in words, but you have not absorbed its beauty. Thinking separates you from direct experience, it replaces life with commentary about life. Thought is inherently divisive. It breaks the wholeness of existence into parts, right and wrong, good and bad, me and you, success and failure. Once the mind fragments reality, it begins to live in conflict. Every thought is a boundary and every boundary creates distance. The more you think, the more you separate yourself from life's natural flow. The deeper truth cannot be reached through analysis because analysis is always looking at the reflection, never the source. To see clearly, one must look without the interference of words or judgment. Stillness is not the absence of intelligence, it is the highest form of it. When the mind becomes quiet, a different kind of knowing awakens, one that does not depend on memory or logic. It is an intuitive perception that arises from being fully present. This awareness does not dissect or measure, it simply sees. In that seeing, truth reveals itself effortlessly. The silence of awareness is not empty, it is rich, vibrant and alive. It is the space where everything is known without needing to be thought about. Real wisdom begins when you stop mistaking thought for knowing. The mind can be a useful instrument, but only when it is in its right place, beneath awareness, not above it. When you no longer rely on thought to define your reality, you open yourself to the vast intelligence that exists beyond the mind. You begin to experience life directly, without distortion, without boundaries. Knowing then becomes not something you think about, but something you are. Overthinking is like poison that slowly seeps into the mind and clouds your inner clarity. Every unnecessary thought becomes a ripple that disturbs the still waters of awareness. You start believing that thinking more will bring understanding, yet it only brings confusion. The mind becomes a battlefield where endless what-ifs and whys collide, creating storms that have no real existence outside of your imagination. The more you turn these thoughts over, the further you move from reality, trapped in a web spun entirely by your own mind. What could be a simple moment becomes a maze of analysis, and peace becomes a distant dream. When the mind is overwhelmed with thought, it begins to feed on itself. You start to question everything, even your own peace, your own worth, your own direction. Every choice becomes heavy, every silence unbearable. You think you are seeking clarity, but you are only stirring the dust deeper into the air. This constant mental churning exhausts your energy and blurs your perception. Life starts to feel complex, not because it truly is, but because you have filled it with unnecessary layers of doubt and speculation. Thought is a useful servant, but a destructive master. When it dominates, emotion follows, and together they create a cycle of restlessness. Overthinking magnifies fear into reality and uncertainty into pain. You replay conversations, imagine outcomes, and construct futures that may never come to pass. In doing so, you live less in the world as it is and more in the world as you fear it might be. The more you think, the more life slips through your fingers. Because thought is always behind or ahead, never here. True strength lies not in controlling every thought, but in letting go of the need to think about everything. When you stop chasing answers, clarity begins to emerge on its own. Silence is not the absence of thought, it is the space where real perception awakens. It is in that stillness that emotion loses its grip and you begin to feel life without distortion. In this space, you see how most of your suffering is not caused by what happens to you, but by what your mind endlessly creates around it. When the storm of overthinking subsides, awareness shines like sunlight breaking through clouds. You begin to sense the vastness of being that lies beneath every thought and emotion. Life becomes simple, fluid and alive again. Overthinking cannot survive in the light of presence because the present moment holds no room for imaginary fears. When the poison of thought dissolves, clarity takes its place and what once felt heavy and uncertain becomes effortless and clear. When you begin to observe your thoughts, a new kind of clarity arises within you. Awareness is not another thought, it is the space in which thoughts appear and disappear. Most people are caught in their minds, believing that every thought that crosses their awareness is true or important. But when you step back and simply watch the movement of your mind, you begin to see that thoughts have no real substance. They are like clouds drifting across a vast sky, temporary, shifting and powerless unless you give them meaning. The act of observation separates you from the noise and suddenly you realize that the thinker is not who you truly are. Once awareness awakens, thoughts lose their ability to dominate. You see anger before it becomes action, fear before it takes hold, and judgment before it hardens into belief. In that space between awareness and reaction lies freedom. It is not about controlling or suppressing your thoughts, because control is just another form of bondage. It is about understanding their nature. Thoughts feed on attention. When you identify with them, they grow stronger. When you watch them in silence, they dissolve. Awareness is not in conflict with the mind, it simply stands apart, untouched and unwavering. The more you practice awareness, the more you begin to sense that thought is only one small fragment of your intelligence. Beneath the noise of thinking, there exists a deeper knowing, a silent intelligence that needs no words. This intelligence does not analyze, it perceives. It does not react, it responds. When you rest in that state, the constant movement of the mind begins to slow, not because you force it to, but because you are no longer feeding it with attention. Thought becomes a tool again, something you can use when needed and set down when not. This awareness transforms your entire relationship with life. You no longer see yourself as a victim of emotions or circumstances. You begin to witness even pain, anger, and confusion with calm detachment. This does not make you cold, it makes you free. You start to act out of clarity instead of compulsion. The outer world may still bring challenges, but the inner storm no longer controls your every move. Awareness becomes like a lamp in a dark room. It does not fight the darkness, it simply reveals what is real and what is illusion. Freedom begins when you stop fighting the mind and start understanding it. Awareness breaks the chains of unconscious living and brings light into every hidden corner of your being. Once you see that thoughts are fleeting visitors and not your identity, you are no longer imprisoned by them. In that still space of awareness, you rediscover your natural state, unshaken, limitless, and profoundly alive. Silence is often mistaken for emptiness, but in truth, it is the most profound presence that exists. The mind, always restless and hungry for noise, fears silence because it cannot control it. In silence, thought has no ground to stand on, it fades into the background, revealing the raw, unfiltered nature of existence. What many call emptiness is actually fullness beyond measure, a state where the boundaries of self dissolve and awareness expands without effort. Silence does not take anything away, it strips only illusion, leaving behind what is eternal and real. When you are surrounded by noise, both external and internal, you lose contact with the subtle rhythm of life. The mind constantly demands stimulation because it survives on movement. It dreads stillness, for in stillness its illusions are exposed. Yet true understanding cannot arise in chaos, it blooms only in the quiet spaces between thoughts. The moment you stop running from silence, you begin to sense a dimension that words cannot capture. It is not a void to be filled, but a vastness to be experienced. A living presence that holds everything together without ever being seen. Silence does not mean the absence of sound, it is the absence of disturbance. You may sit in a crowded place and still feel the calm pulse of silence within you. This silence is not created, it is discovered. It has always been there beneath the surface noise of thoughts and emotions. Once you touch it, you realize that it is not lifeless or cold, it is deeply alive, aware and awake. In silence, there is no separation between you and existence. The air, the light, the breath, all move in one rhythm. It is here that life begins to reveal its sacred balance. When you enter silence, the mind no longer dictates what should be. The constant labeling, judging and comparing fade, and what remains is pure perception. You begin to see life as it truly is, not as your mind interprets it. This silence holds an intelligence that no amount of thinking can reach. It guides you without direction, teaches without words, and heals without effort. It shows that peace is not something to be achieved, it is your natural state, hidden beneath the endless commentary of thought. Silence is not something you create through effort or control, it emerges naturally when you stop clinging to the noise. It is not the opposite of sound, but the background of all existence, the space where everything erases and dissolves. To rest in silence is to return home to yourself, free from the distortions of fear, memory and desire. In silence, you are not empty, you are complete. You are not lost, you are infinite. The more you enter it, the more you realize that silence is not a place to escape to. It is the very essence of who you are. Emotions are not independent forces, they are the reflections of your thoughts taking shape within you. Every emotion, whether joy or sorrow, fear or anger, begins as a simple thought that you allowed to grow roots. The mind gives it life, the body gives it form, and together they create a reality that feels unshakable. You think a thought of loss and sadness follows. You think a thought of threat and fear rises. The emotion is only the shadow that the thought casts, yet you keep chasing the shadow and wonder why it never leaves. The more attention you give it, the stronger it grows until it becomes the lens through which you see your entire world. When you do not understand this connection, you start fighting emotions instead of seeing where they come from. You resist sadness, you suppress anger, you deny fear. But none of these vanish by force. They deepen, they disguise themselves, they return. The real transformation begins not by controlling what you feel, but by watching what you think. Every emotion is a servant of thought, loyal and obedient. When thought turns dark, emotion follows faithfully. When thought turns still, emotion finds peace. You cannot silence a storm by shouting over it, but by calming the wind that moves it. Most people live reacting to their emotions as if they are victims of an unseen force. Yet emotion has no power unless the mind gives it fuel. You think you are sad because of the world, but the world only triggers what already lives within you. The external is merely a mirror showing you what you continue to create internally. The real battlefield is not outside, it is in the space between your thought and your awareness. Once you see this, you begin to understand that emotional freedom is not a distant ideal, it is the natural state beneath the clutter of reactive thinking. Awareness is the doorway to mastery. When you observe a thought before it becomes emotion, you disarm its strength. You see anger as it arises and it dissolves in your seeing. You witness fear forming and it loses its grip. You recognize sadness beginning to take shape and it melts under the light of attention. This is not suppression, it is transformation. Awareness burns through thought before it becomes shadow. It is not a fight, it is the end of conflict itself. In this watchfulness, emotions lose their power to control you and you begin to experience them without drowning in them. When the link between thought and emotion becomes clear, a deep stillness replaces confusion. You begin to move through life untouched by the waves of your mind. Emotions still appear, but they pass like clouds across a vast sky. You no longer chase happiness, nor do you fear sorrow. They both come and go, leaving your awareness unmoved. The shadow cannot harm what stands in the light. Once you understand that emotions follow thoughts like shadows, you stop running after peace and realize that peace was never missing. It was only hidden behind the noise of your own thinking. The sense of I that people cling to is nothing more than a construction of thought, a story the mind keeps repeating to maintain its illusion of control. Every opinion, memory, and belief that forms this identity is borrowed from the past and reinforced through endless mental repetition. The ego cannot exist without thought, it feeds on the constant narration of me and mine. When the mind is quiet, this artificial identity begins to fade. revealing that there was never a separate self to protect or defend. The ego's survival depends on noise, on the endless commentary that separates you from life. As long as the mind keeps creating divisions, the ego finds ground to stand on. It thrives on comparison and judgment, on the need to feel superior or inferior. It attaches itself to achievements, possessions, relationships, and failures, declaring each as a definition of who you are. This attachment creates fear, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of insignificance. The ego cannot bear uncertainty because it only exists in what is known and labeled. It builds walls around itself, mistaking isolation for safety. But what the ego calls safety is merely a cage built from thought, keeping you distant from the vastness of reality. When you start observing the mind, a shift begins. You see the endless commentary running inside, the need to justify, defend or prove something. The more you watch, the more you realize that this voice is not who you are, it is only the echo of conditioning. The ego's power weakens when it is seen clearly. It cannot survive under the light of awareness because awareness does not think, it simply sees. The moment you stop identifying with every thought, the sense of I begins to loosen, and what once felt like the center of your existence starts to dissolve into something far greater. This dissolution is not destruction, it is liberation. Without the constant burden of self-importance, a natural ease enters life. Actions become pure, free from the desire to gain or prove. Relationships become lighter, no longer based on need or expectation. You start to see others not as threats or comparisons, but as extensions of the same life that breathes through you. The ego thrives on separation, but awareness reveals unity. When the veil of thought lifts, what remains is not emptiness but wholeness, a boundless intelligence that does not need to call itself I. When thought loses its grip, the ego has nowhere to stand. In that stillness, what remains is pure consciousness, limitless, vast and untouched by identity. There is no center, no boundary, no story to protect. Life moves through you effortlessly without resistance or fear. The dissolution of the ego is not the end of you, it is the end of illusion. What remains is presence itself, silent, aware and infinitely alive. Peace is not something that can be hunted or achieved through external means. It does not lie in possessions, people or accomplishments. It is not hidden somewhere in the world, waiting for you to discover it. Peace is what remains when the mind's constant noise fades into silence. Every thought, worry and ambition acts as a layer covering this natural state. The more you chase peace outside, the more it slips away, because the act of chasing itself is disturbance. True peace cannot be earned or forced. It can only emerge when you stop identifying with the restless movement of the mind. The human tendency is to believe that once the world around us changes, peace will follow. But this is an illusion that keeps you endlessly occupied. You fix one problem, another arises, you win one battle, another begins. This endless pursuit of outer calm is the ego's way of ensuring that you never look inward. Peace is not created, it is uncovered. Beneath the layers of noise and desire lies a stillness so vast that nothing can shake it. You do not need to travel anywhere to find it, you only need to stop running away from yourself. When the mind quiets, even for a moment, an extraordinary clarity appears. That silence is not dull, it is alive, vibrant and full of intelligence. In that stillness, there is no confusion, no craving, no fear. You see life exactly as it is, without the distortions of your opinions or expectations. The peace that arises is not dependent on circumstance. It does not vanish when challenges come, because it does not belong to thought, it belongs to awareness itself. To reach that depth, one must stop feeding the machinery of thought. Every opinion you defend, every memory you replay, every future you worry about fuels the noise that covers peace. Watch the mind without interference, and its grip begins to loosen. The endless stream of words loses power, and what once felt like chaos becomes quiet observation. In that quiet, peace reveals itself not as something you gain, but as what you have always been. This peace is not fragile, it is unshakable. It is the foundation of all clarity and strength. Once you experience it, no external storm can disturb it because it does not rely on the changing surface of life. It is the stillness beneath every movement, the space between every thought. When the chatter of the mind dissolves, peace shines effortlessly, not as an achievement, but as your true nature, eternal, silent and complete. You are not bound by your thoughts unless you decide to be. The mind creates an endless web of words, fears, and memories that you begin to mistake for reality. Every thought you cling to becomes another bar in the cage of your own making. You polish these bars with constant analysis, comparison, and judgment, believing that understanding them will free you. But freedom does not come from decorating your prison, it comes from realizing that the walls were never real to begin with. The thoughts that trouble you are not chains, they are passing ripples in a vast ocean of awareness. When you stop giving energy to every thought that arises, something extraordinary happens. The mind begins to settle, and what remains is a profound stillness. That stillness is not emptiness, it is the very essence of life. It holds within it the clarity, the depth, and the intelligence that constant mental noise hides. You begin to see that the liberation is not a distant goal to achieve through years of effort, it is a simple recognition that your awareness was never trapped, only clouded. Each time you identify with your thoughts, you shrink your boundless being into something limited and fragile. You start living within imaginary boundaries, confined by fears that have no substance outside your own mind. But the moment you step back and watch the movement of thought without interference, the illusion breaks. You realize that the sky of consciousness has always been open, vast, and untouched by the storms that pass through it. You were never meant to live trapped inside your own head. The world outside is vast, alive, breathing, yet you keep circling the same patterns of thought as if they define your existence. Step beyond the prison of your mind and witness how effortlessly life unfolds. When you stop identifying with your thoughts, you reclaim your freedom. You are not the voice in your head, you are the silence that listens. And in that silence, life begins again. Freedom does not demand a fight, it demands surrender. Not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of illusion. It means allowing thoughts to come and go without building a story around them. It means seeing anger, fear, and desire as temporary visitors, not as who you are. When this understanding deepens, the constant tension of life begins to dissolve. You stop being a prisoner, not because the prison disappears, but because you finally see that the door was never locked. The choice is always yours. Keep polishing the bars of your mental cage or walk out into the open sky of awareness. The mind will always try to pull you back with its noise and its endless demands. But once you have tasted freedom, no illusion can hold you for long. The thoughts will still come, the world will still move, but within you there will be a stillness that nothing can disturb. That stillness is not something you create, it is what you are when you stop mistaking the cage for your home